John, this statement came this morning from Moscow, from the Russian Ministry of Defense. So the first thing is it's a fairly political statement from the Russian government because it comes from Moscow. They are saying that they will treat U.S. aircraft as targets if they are flying, frankly, west of the Euphrates River in Syria after this shoot down over the weekend. Now, U.S. officials right now are saying they do not think that they are going to be targeted by the Russians, that we're not going to start seeing, dogfights up in the sky. But the question is, what do they really mean? What are the Russians really after now? They also are saying that they're going to break contact with the U.S. in this communications line that's been operating for months now, this so-called deconfliction line, where the Russian military and the U.S. military talk to each other all day long about where they are flying in Syria so they stay out of each other's way. The Russians have threatened this before, but again, we have seen that as a political statement while military staff personnel on the ground essentially very quietly do continue to communicate. So the question right now is, are the Russians really angry enough about the U.S. shootdown of this Syrian warplane over the weekend that the U.S. says was threatening the forces it backs in Syria? Are the Russians really angry enough about that to start targeting the U.S. right now? U.S. officials say they don't think it's going to go that far, but make no mistake, everybody's watching this very closely.
Good morning. Welcome back. We have a Fox News alert right now. Tensions escalating between Russia and the U.S. An armed Russian fighter jet taunting a U.S. Air Force recon plane. Pentagon officials say the Russians came within 5 feet of the Americans over the Baltic Sea. The incident comes one day after a U.S. fighter jet shot down a Syrian warplane near the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa. Russia responding by threatening to target American and coalition planes. We begin with a Fox News alert out of Syria. Fox News has just learned that a U.S. Air Force F-15 fighter jet has shot down an armed Iranian drone. We're told that it was flying in southern Syria near U.S.-backed forces. It is the second time now in less than a month the U.S. has shot down an Iranian drone, and it comes on the heels of a Syrian fighter jet shot down by an American fighter on Sunday. Russia retaliated after that with a warning saying our planes would be targeted over Syrian skies.
Yet another layer to an already complicated and dicey situation in light of what happened on Sunday and the ongoing fallout from that. But what we know about the U.S. shooting down this drone, an F-15 shot it down again near U.S.-backed forces in southern Syria. It's the second time that the U.S. has downed an Iranian drone in less than a month, and the 5th time since late May that the U.S. military has bombed pro-Syrian forces in southern Syria. Now, it comes also, of course, in light of the ongoing tension over the U.S.'s downing of that Syrian fighter jet on Sunday and the ongoing fallout, of course, from that and what has become really an increasingly crowded battlefield in Syria with Russia, the U.S., Syria, and Iran all involved in the fight, not only against ISIS, but also in the ongoing civil war, the bloody and brutal civil war. And all this as Syria's government has launched also a new offensive against ISIS today in northern Syria and against rebel forces as well, some backed by the U.S. in the central part of the country, Shannon.
All right, so what do we know about what's being done to de-escalate this situation between Russia and the U.S. now?
Well, U.S. officials, Shannon, say that communication lines between both countries and military operations centers are open. They're online. Despite the tough talk from Russia's foreign minister said that communication channels have been suspended. Well, U.S. military officials say that the so-called deconfliction channel, basically the hotline that both military's operations centers can get online and talk about where their jets are at so that there's no confusion, that remains the case. But again, Russia's foreign minister said that U.S.-led coalition jets flying west of the Euphrates will be targeted or at least tracked, not necessarily shot down, but tracked, he said, or targeted if they pose a threat to other Russian aircraft. But again, this is the downing of that Iranian drone adds yet another complicated layer to this very tense situation that continues to unfold.
Мы призываем Соединенные Штаты и всех других, кто имеет свои силы или своих советников на земле, обеспечивать скоординированность в нашей работе, зоны деэскалации являются одним из возможных вариантов совместного продвижения вперед. Приглашаем всех избегать односторонних действий, уважать, еще раз подчеркну, суверенитет Сирии и подключиться к нашей общей работе, которая согласована с правительством Сирийской Арабской Республики.
That it has taken so long since the Russian intervention in Syria began in earnest, a year and a half ago, for an incident to occur that might directly pit Russian and American forces against each other has been nothing short of miraculous. That luck ran out this week, with the downing of a Syrian government warplane accused of carrying out airstrikes against the US-backed opposition Syrian Democratic Forces, the first time since the 1999 Kosovo campaign that an American fighter has shot down a plane in air-to-air combat. The Kremlin's carefully crafted angry response warned that, from this time forward, Moscow will consider as hostile any aircraft overflying Syrian territory without the express permission of the Bashar al-Assad regime, but, crucially, it did not commit the Russian contingent in Syria to take action. Moscow appears to be carefully parsing its words to avoid drawing a red line it may not wish to enforce, or, as my colleague Michael Kaufman has aptly pointed out, may not have the technical abilities in place to actually back up. Presumably, coalition aircraft flying in Syrian airspace may now be illuminated by Russian anti-air defense radars, in essence daring American and allied pilots to respond, or otherwise accept a heightened level of risk in carrying out their operations. But what it means is that the US-Russia relationship will now depend on the nerves and split-second reactions of pilots and ground controllers, not the plans and preferences of presidents and diplomats. It also bears an unsettling resemblance to the plot of the 1959 nuclear post-apocalyptic novel Alas, Babylon, in which an accidental shot at the Soviet base in Latakia, Syria, is the proximate cause of the nuclear war between the superpowers. The Pentagon will be prepared for any military contingency that may arise, but if we examine Vladimir Putin's strategy after the last major incident, the shooting down of a Russian aircraft in November 2015 by a Turkish fighter, after a very brief violation of Turkish airspace, it becomes clear that Putin never reacts as expected. Putin eschewed a direct military response, one that might in turn have triggered a reaction from Turkey's NATO allies upholding their Article 5 commitments, in favor of a series of non-military, asymmetric responses. A combination of deftly wielded economic sanctions and very clear signals on a possible Russian shift on the Kurdish question helped to bring about, 6 months later, the desired apology on the part of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. If there are continued problems in Syria, Moscow may not want to directly challenge the capabilities of the US military, but rather find ways to use other tools to complicate life for the United States throughout the region, and with the prospect of major new US sanctions looming in the horizon, Putin may feel he has now nothing to lose by moving to an even more confrontational stance. This raises another point. Listening to the various hearings that have been convened on Russia over the last several weeks, there are signs of cognitive dissonance. Russia is depicted both as a powerful foe capable of disrupting and subverting the combined strength of the Atlantic Alliance, and as a regime on the verge of collapse and susceptible to American pressure. The risk of this approach is suggesting that a more confrontational stance with Russia can be taken without much commitment or preparation on the US side. It is apparent that the early goals of the Trump administration to explore some sort of grand bargain with the Kremlin are now completely off the table. It may be that the divergence between Russian and American values and interests is too great to be bridged by any set of compromises. If that is the case, then the United States needs to think soberly about its next steps, and not stumble into a clash with Russia that it neither foresees nor desires over the skies of Syria.